We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast was recorded, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and future. Welcome to the podcast series of Raising the Bar Melbourne, curated by the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences at the University of Melbourne. This special health edition of Raising the Bar, held in May of 2026, featured 20 talks by some of Melbourne's leading healthcare experts and was held across 10 pubs and bars, all in one night. The speakers presented topics ranging from AI and cancer research to understanding ADHD and neurodiversity, helping kids sleep, healthy social media habits, the future of robotic surgery, and much more. In this episode, you'll hear Dr Shaminka Mangelsdorf and Rory Sorensen talk about how social media shapes youth well-being, from online risks to positive digital spaces and healthier, more balanced habits.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really great to see so many of you here tonight on a Wednesday evening. I'm assuming this topic is of interest to you if you're here. Rory and I are hoping to, talk a little bit about what we know about social media, some of its harms and how it can help as well. But we're researchers from an organisation called Origin, which is very commonly mixed up with an energy company, but it is not an energy company. It's basically a youth mental health organisation. We actually work in the digital division of Origin, and of course the Centre for Youth Mental Health at Melbourne Uni. And tonight we're really just exploring the question of whether social media helps or harms mental health. Before we get into that, Rory, I'd love to hear what was social media like when you were growing up?
Well, I am 28, so I'm not quite a young person anymore the way we're talking about, but it does mean that I've been on Facebook since I was 12, which was start of high school. And it's really hard when you asked me that originally to try and figure out what it was like. It feels like it's just always been there. But I do think that it was not always so enmeshed with my life when I was a teenager. I feel like there was like an off switch for it maybe, but it's kind of just always been there. How about you?
That's interesting. Yeah, for me, I'm a little bit older, so I did actually grow up with MSN. I don't know if anyone remembers MSN. So some of us do. That's great. It was one of Microsoft's offerings, and you could upload a profile picture, you could chat to your friends, and you can even you could post a moody status about how you were feeling, and things like that too. But actually, my experiences on MSN as a young person partially led me to my career choice now. I can think of a couple of really important examples for me when I was about 14, and I had friends who were struggling with their mental health. And on 2 occasions, actually, I had a friend reach out and talk about the fact that they were actually having thoughts of harming themselves. And in chatting through that overnight, I was very thankful that neither of them followed through with plans. But it actually was part of what led me to today being a psychologist and working with young people who do struggle with their mental health and with thoughts of suicide as well. Today I guess we're talking about a bit of a hot topic because, flash forward to 2026 and social media has been something that has been hotly debated, particularly when it comes to young people. You may be aware that in December last year, a ban came into effect for young people under the age of 16, banning social media for them. And so really tonight we're exploring, is social media helpful or harmful? And spoiler alert, we're actually going to say it's a little bit of both. So over to you, Rory.
Thank you. To start the question, I think before we start to even answer the question of is social media use helpful or harmful, we want to start talking about what is actually happening online, because we can talk about active use of social media. So that could be things like you're messaging friends, you're sharing content, or you're making posts, creating content. Meanwhile, someone might be doing something more passive, like they might be just doom scrolling or reading content, watching short form video content. And often it's young people doing a bit of both. And it can be quite tempting as well to look at that and say that it's probably active use is more helpful and passive use is more harmful. And looking at the research from the mid-2010s when Facebook was starting to take off, that is what the research suggests, that it's more passive use that is harmful. Active use can be neutral, can be helpful, a bit of both. But then if you think about how young people are using social media today, you can think about someone who might be on X or Twitter, depending on how you know it, getting into a really nasty war with other people about which pop star's the better vocalist. Or I've actually done interviews with young people on our digital mental health platform called Most, and they've been talking about their experience of just reading other people talk about mental health and seeing how that can be really helpful for them. So we kind of need to move away, I think, from that active versus passive dichotomy. And then from there, we can start to talk about maybe its quality or quantity question. And we might want to say, well, how would a young person describe their use of social media? Are they saying that it's helpful? Are they saying it's harmful? If it is harmful, are they in a position where they're able to take steps to manage that? How long are they on social media? Is it passive use? Is it active use? For example, you could have two young people on something like Instagram. One young person could spend an hour just directly messaging their friends, and the other could have spending an hour just scrolling through videos. And that's a very different experience for both of them. So coming from there, then we might say that the line between help and harm is where that young person has their own capacity to regulate their use or responsibly use social media. Are they identifying that behavior as harmful? But before we do that, or if we want to ask that question, then we need to recognize as well that social media are not neutral tools that we just click onto. They are not neutral websites. They are commercial systems which have been designed, they've been developed, they've been iterated to really capture and hold your attention. And Shaminka will talk a little bit more about that in a bit, about some of those techniques that they use. But these are platforms that have been designed to grab your attention and keep you there. They are not designed with an individual's well-being or regulated use in mind. So I don't think we're really looking at an individual young person's capacity to regulate their use. I think it's really important that we don't just say that the problem lies within the young person and their control. And similarly, we also don't just want to say that it's a parent should be monitoring or regulating that use either, because, I mean, I'd love to ask the audience just to take a second, if you know any young people in your life, since the ban has come on, if you know anyone who's on social media when they're not 15. Like it's well beyond what a parent can control as well. So I think we need to be realistic about that and consider what can be done. Because social media itself now, it is socially, culturally, developmentally embedded in a young person's development and their lives. And it's not something that we can just get rid of. Social media can meet some core needs. It can meet those needs for connection, for belonging, to be seen. It can provide young people with a place where they can express their identity safely. They might be able to join a community with people who share hobbies or interests or identity groups and access information. And social media, with that identity, it can help facilitate the identity formation. So it is not simply a net negative as well when we're talking about social media. So I think what we're trying to do with this talk is unpack what social media use is, because once you start to think about it for a second, the question of, is social media use helpful or harmful, it starts to fall apart. And we really just want to start to think about what are some of the ways it's helpful, what are some of the ways that it's harmful, and what are the contexts in which it can be both. So with that, I would love to hand over to you to talk about some of the ways it can be harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are some really great points, Rory. I guess the term attention economy exists because it is our attention that commercial companies are really after. And that's because keeping people in the app does make money. It exposes people, whether they're young people or adults. It exposes us to advertising, to that sort of social pressure to purchase certain items. It also encourages people to post more, to encourage more of that as well. And so it is really a booming industry. There's a lot of money in it as well. So let's actually think about some of the harms that young people themselves actually can experience when they are exposed to online environments. So first of all, I just thought I'd give you a few examples. Let's think about a girl called Mia, who's 14, and she scrolls Instagram late at night, and she feels increasingly not good enough. She spends a lot of time on social media comparing herself to others. And this is just one example of someone who's engaging in what we call constant social comparison, which, whether you're a young person or not, is something that social media thrives off, really. Second example, Noah, who's 17, who gets stuck in algorithm loops of gym content and develops rigid, unhealthy expectations of his own body. And we know particularly appearance is something that can come up a lot on social media. It can really fuel particular stereotypes and particular expectations of how someone needs to look all the time. And that can be particularly problematic for individuals who are more prone towards eating disorders, and really unhelpful information can be shared about that too. And let's take another example, Charlie, who's 15, who checks Snapchat constantly, feeling anxious about being left out of group chats. And we know that also another way that people commonly use social media is just to compulsively check it. I don't know if you've ever found yourself suddenly on social media and you don't know how you got there. I think a lot of us do that it kind of becomes a bit of a compulsion and we're not really thinking about it anymore. But these are just a few examples. There are other unhealthy ways that we can interact with social media, and young people particularly. We know that cyberbullying happens at alarming rates. We also know that when phones are used overnight, that can disrupt sleep, and that's really important, particularly for young people who need a lot more sleep at their age. It also can get in the way of in-person socialization. So when we are on our phones so much that we're actually not engaging with what's happening in our environment, that can be another thing. And lastly, just exposure to distressing or harmful content. We don't know what's coming next in our feeds, and anything can pop up next. And so these are all, potential harms. I'm sure that you can think of more as well. It's not an exhaustive list. But many of these aren't necessarily new, like brand new, unique problems, but they're actually amplifying what's already occurring in everyday life. So things like anxiety, identity pressure, comparison, these are things that we've probably all experienced growing up. The issue here is that with technology, those things can be amplified to an extent that we actually haven't seen before. And so the new aspect of these issues really lies in how that technology can be harnessed. First of all, it's ever present. We know that technology is really, we use the word ubiquitous, or it's accessible just to anyone and everyone almost. And because of this, information can flow so rapidly at a rate that it hasn't before in previous generations. And lastly, it's the addictive nature of these commercial social media platforms that we really need to be concerned about. So the rationale behind the social media ban is that exposing young people to these harms so early on is going to be detrimental and must be stopped. Because research suggests that in the last 15 or so years, as usage of social media has increased, what has gone along with it are also increases in depression, anxiety, loneliness, self-harm and suicidality amongst adolescents. And some have argued that it really is because of social media that we've seen those increases. And this has actually especially been found in women, interestingly enough. These changes have coincided with increased time spent online and reduced face-to-face interaction as well. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of self-disclosure now, if you're game. Hands up if you reckon you scroll a little bit too much from time to time. Yeah. I'd love to know who didn't put their hand up, but thank you so much for being honest. Appreciate it. So you'll be relieved scrolling a little bit too much from time to time is not an addiction, right? And so when we're actually thinking about actual social media addiction, the prevalence rates in young people are actually between 5 to 20%. So it's not 100%, but it's actually still a problematic amount. When we're talking about social media addiction, we're actually talking about compulsive use that is at an extreme level. It's excessive, it's compulsive, and it's actually interfering with daily functioning. So to the extent that someone really cannot live without their phone, it's going to cause them a lot of distress, and it's actually getting in the way of them functioning at school or work or in their personal relationships as well. So to understand social media addiction, which is really the extreme end of things, the extreme end of harms, we need to understand how us as humans are motivated. So at a simple level, we're motivated as humans, we're simple beings. We're motivated to be attracted towards things that bring us a sense of reward. We have a reward chemical in our brain called dopamine. And we also need to become ready to move away from threats when our stress hormone cortisol is released. In a tricky way, some of the most tantalizing rewards can actually stimulate a bit of dopamine and a bit of cortisol. And this is what some of our commercial platforms really thrive off, because they can use AI-driven algorithms that, of course, as we know, show us content which is going to be more likely to be interesting to us. And if it's more interesting to us, it's more likely to release dopamine in our brains, essentially. And so any sort of exposure of the brain to really high levels of dopamine can give it a bit of an addictive quality. But for us, we're actually more likely to become addicted to something when we don't know when the next dopamine hit is coming. When there's a possibility that, the next scroll could be something that really does it for us. That's the sort of thing that can actually keep us trapped in an app. And so this sort of dopamine spike that can be experienced, that can be the same whether someone's exposed to drugs or like not necessarily exactly the same amount of dopamine, but it's the same sort of process being exposed to drugs compared to being exposed to a smartphone app. And teens and young people are especially vulnerable to this. Firstly, their brains are still developing, and so developing these associations between high levels or variable levels of reward and dopamine with social media can actually leave a lasting association that can, when it does develop earlier in life. Secondly, they're actually more vulnerable to social media addiction, particularly because they're approaching social media at a time when social comparison and peer acceptance has a heightened level of importance in their lives. And so it's even more rewarding. And for them, it's not just about moving towards rewards, but also moving away from threats like rejection or missing out as well. So, of course, this picture is not sounding very healthy, but these, thankfully, are not the only ways that humans can be motivated. And also, these are not the only ways that social media platforms can be developed. So Rory's going to tell us in a moment about how what some of the potential benefits are of social media use, and also a bit about some of the work that a bit later we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done to develop a healthier alternative to social media as it is. But I want to tell you about one of the key theories of motivation as we get into that. This is a theory that we have sought to harness in some of the work that we've been doing. It's called self-determination theory. And really it puts forward that the healthiest form of motivation that we can engage in is a motivation that comes from the inside, so an intrinsic motivator. And that actually occurs when there's a balance of three aspects. One is autonomy, so this idea that we can freely make choices. And as I said before, often when we engage in compulsive behavior around social media, we actually lose our sense of choice and agency. And so it's really important that we do continue to have choices. That's a really important way for us to be motivated. The second one is competence. So rather than being a passive, uncritical consumer of content, that we actually want to be able to learn and grow and push into new areas. And thirdly is relatedness. So really that humans thrive when real supportive connections can flourish. So over to you, Rory.
Thank you. It does paint a bit of a dire picture, a little bit. I wanted to ask for a show of hands, though. Who here has used social media to get tips about something, if that's a workout or a recipe or anything like that, an outfit? Yeah. What about when it's been shown to you without even looking for it? It's just sort of come up on your feed. Seen those advice? Yeah. Who uses social media to connect with people? Who uses social media to influence or work with the community? So it might be a club you're a part of or a hobby posting about. Yeah, a lot of you. I think that's a fairly common way that social media can be used. And I wanted to bring up my own examples. So if we think about Ella, she's 16. She's just been diagnosed with ADHD, and she is following some content creators on TikTok who are giving her functional adaptive strategies for changing her quality of life. Or we might be able to think about Jay, who's 18. They are non-binary, and they are joining a group on Discord. And this is giving them a whole new language to talk about their identity, to explore what gender can look like and how they can express that. Or we might be able to think about Sam, who's 15. His family have just moved him halfway across the world. And with social media, he's able to keep in touch with his friends from home. And hopefully one day when they go traveling, they'll be able to link back up and reconnect. So I think there's a lot going on with social media, but one of the big things that it's about is connection. Connection can be supportive, it can be informative, it can be protective, and it can be meaningful. 20 years ago, social life for a teenager would have looked so different. If you think maybe it's limited to their friends, their family, their school, and after-school hobbies, whereas now with young people, they can access communities in their city, in their state, interstate, internationally. And they can be about so many different things. They can be about identity markers. They can be about niche hobbies that no one in their life knows about. They can start to share tips about ADHD study skills or any sorts of like functional adaptive strategies. And part of that is enabled by the way that social media allows us to reach out and connect with other people about certain things. I want to also bring up now Erikson's stages of development, which is one of the big theories about human development. And just for this, you don't have to worry about the whole thing. We're just talking about adolescence, so that period of 12 to 18, when the big concern is this idea between identity formation and identity confusion, going into a little bit this idea of isolation versus intimacy as they transition out of adolescence into young adulthood. What does it mean to a young person's identity formation that they now have access to so many new forms of connection about so many different things that no longer limit them based to what's in their immediate vicinity? If they are a queer person, or if they are from a culturally or linguistically diverse background in a place where there's not really anyone like them around, what does it mean for them now that they can access information or connection or identity from other sources? For young people in marginalised communities especially, that can be so important. It can be allowing exploration, normalisation, validation, just being seen. I do know that for me personally, when I was 17, 18, just being exposed to queer people living their lives and enjoying their lives really made a difference for me coming into my own identity as a queer person. And that came through social media, just by seeing people around, meeting people, seeing that things are fine, that is something that people are doing. Normalization and validation themselves are also very powerful clinical tools that Shaminka and I can tell you about, but they are also so powerful as individual experiences themselves. When we were talking about our alternative to social media, we're talking about Most, which is a platform we've developed. It's a digital mental health platform. But one of the important things to know about it is that we have what's called the community, which is a moderated feed where young people can post about what's going on for them. Then other young people, the peer workers, the moderators, can respond with support or advice or encouragement. They can say like, oh, you've been working on that for ages. Like, good on you for really doing that presentation. It's not all just like mental health stuff. You can talk about pets and book recommendations, of course, as people will do. But I've conducted interviews with young people on Most. And one of the most common things for people to say is, I didn't know that was happening to other people. I didn't know that this had a name. I didn't know that I thought this was just me. And it's that access to validation and normalization that is so important. And I know we're talking about just mental health here, but I think that extends to other factors of development and identity. It's not just about mental health. It's knowing that I thought this was a me thing. I didn't know that there was a language that could describe it. I didn't know that other people were going through the same thing. And this is social media. This is something that is enabled by social media. And especially if we're just talking about even just seeing other people having these conversations, that is definitionally passive use, which we were just saying is bad, or which we would consider bad. But here are some examples where young people are actually really benefiting from that passive use. That being said, we cannot ignore that commercial social media more generally are providing young people with new spaces for identity expression, but there is that commercial undertone to it. But that does come back to what we were saying about hobbies and sexuality, fashion, taste, all these different things that young people are interested in that they want to talk about. They are able to talk about it with other people on social media. Another thing that social media is doing realistically is democratizing information. So you might have content creators talking about ADHD study skills or healthcare. I've definitely seen things about what to say when you're calling Centrelink, all these different things, or those sorts of applications, what's helpful, how to make those applications. And young people can engage with the content directly now. So it's not like some esoteric information that doesn't exist unless you know someone. It's something that is coming along on your social media platform that you can access. You can ask questions, you can talk about whether it's helpful or not. You can have conversations with other people in the comments, for better or for worse, depending on attitudes and stuff. But it is that access to information that we might not have seen 10, 20 years ago about different places you can go. And that information might be about like Centrelink applications or study skills, or it might be about identity factors that you didn't really know existed. The caveat is, though, that unrestricted and unregulated access to social media can carry risks. Content creators do not have to follow ARPA guidelines like we do. And then as well, stranger danger, we all know it. That holds true. And I think it holds even more true if you do not know that this profile you're saying, that they're saying like they're 17 and they live in Narre Warren. I mean, what sort of vigorous identity verification have they gone through? You don't know who they are. And those are important things to be aware of. I think they are important risks. But as Shaminka said, like these platforms also promote divisive or stressful content. So like we've been saying, there are these risks, but those risks should inform the conversation, not shut down the whole project entirely. We wouldn't have these possibilities for young people really at that stage in their lives if it wasn't for social media to be able to explore. Sure, 20 years ago, you might have been able to move to a big city or connect with other communities, but to be able to do that at such a young age when you're really in that phase of identity formation, that is so powerful. And it's become sort of this psychosocial infrastructure for belonging, that there is this access to connection there that can be so meaningful that you can find that belonging. In the offline world, we would expect that there are regulations and rules for any space where young people are allowed to gather. And I don't think that it's unreasonable to expect that of social media platforms either. Now, that's not to suggest that Facebook should go and get ARPA accredited to be a mental health platform, or that we want one adult chaperone for every 10 young people online. I don't think those are realistic. But if we are talking about young people being regulated and responsible with their use of social media, then it seems fair to ask that social media platforms provide that in return, that they enable regulated and responsible use.
Yeah, I guess we kind of need to bring it all together, right? We've told you about some of the downsides of social media, which are pretty significant, and some of the upsides, also pretty significant. So I thought to kind of illustrate the point of how we're trying to approach this topic, I thought that we could take the example of another very controversial topic, which is the topic of rain, which is the water that falls from the sky. And your hands are getting a workout going up and down, I know, but I'm going to ask you again. So hands up if you went outside after this and it was raining, if your first reaction would be like, oh no, like if you kind of like wouldn't be excited about that. Would anyone feel like that? Yeah, cool. Okay, a few of us would feel like that. And maybe it's because like we don't really love getting like a little bit wet. That's a little bit annoying. It kind of doesn't really become, it's not something we plan for in Melbourne, even though it does happen from time to time. But hands up if you know the thought of rain just really like does it for you. You're like, oh, I'm gonna be cozy inside. I kind of like the feeling of being outside and feeling alive. And if you're like the farmers need it. It's really important as well. Like, you know, put your hand up if you love rain too. There you also exist too. Thank you. So I guess my question to you is anyone in this room wrong? Is there actually a wrong perspective on rain here? And I guess I'm not really asking you to respond, so I'm going to answer it for you. So I would be suggesting that actually there are multiple perspectives on rain in the room, right? And they're all valid perspectives. They all bring really important pieces of information, parts of the puzzle for us. And really what I'm talking about is this concept that we talk about in therapy called dialectics, which is this idea that we actually are holding multiple perspectives at once, that it's not either or, but it's both and. And we're actually trying to walk a tricky middle path of nuance in between multiple truths occurring at once. And it's no different when we're kind of coming back to this question of, does social media help or harm youth mental health? We've phrased that in a really black and white way, kind of intentionally, because it isn't actually black and white. It's kind of black and white. There are pros and cons here. And really what we're trying to do tonight is to wrestle with some of the nuance around that. You know, is one approach of, just removing it altogether the way to go? Or is it something that's maybe here to stay and we need to work out how to develop a tricky relationship with social media, particularly for young people as well? Yeah, so I guess we'd just love to share a few thoughts that we have on how we can move forward with this.
Yeah, because like Shaminka said, the answer is not simple. And taking these different points of view that are true, the first is that kind of social media is a fundamental social, emotional, and developmental part of young people's lives. It is fertile ground for development to occur, and it doesn't seem like it's about to go anywhere. And, if you think about even with COVID, if you lived in Melbourne during 2020 and 2021, you probably knew a young person who was taken out of school. They had to go to remote learning. And I just want to give you a second to think about what impact that had on them. What does it mean that for 18 months or so, they were not able to go to this place that they would expect to go, that kind of society tells them is going to be part of their development, and then they weren't able to go. And what would happen then if we think about social media in the same way? If social media has suddenly been taken away, what sort of impacts might there be? That being said, I'm not trying to say that social media is good and that everyone has a right to social media, because it is not necessarily good. It is not bad, but it is not neutral. It is commercialized and it is monetized, and Shaminka has outlined these ways that they capture our attention in nefarious ways that we have not evolved to contend with. Like, it is just so far beyond realistically what we can manage just going about our lives. There are ways you can learn to manage it, and Shaminka will give you some tips if you're worried, if you're feeling a bit scared after hearing us talk for a little while. But, it's not something you're just equipped to deal with in your day-to-day life, really. I do want to bring up an example, though, from internationally. So China has a system set up similar to Australia where young people aren't always able to access the internet. But they've also done something very interesting, I thought, which is that they've recently introduced regulations so that social media influencers, they can't talk about sensitive topics like education or healthcare unless they possess a qualification in that. And I think that's a really interesting top-down illustration of how governments can respond to the question of online safety and what information is available online, who is providing information. And I would be really curious to see how that shakes out over the next few years as an alternative to just saying like, oh, you can't access social media. I did also want to come back to Most, our mental health digital platform again, just because it's very illustrative to what is an alternative for social media. So it's accessible to people aged 15 to 25, and we do have a version of it that's also accessible to 12 to 14-year-olds. And part of it, it's been designed sort of by focusing on self-determination theory, evidence-based practice. It's been co-designed by young people, and it's been designed to support them, to provide them support. And some of the support works in what we call journeys, which are these self-directed therapy modules you can work through. So it starts with a bit of psychoeducation. It will bring up skills and strategies you can learn. So for example, the sleep journey, that will give you a bit of information about what sleep hygiene is and what are some things that you can do that might help if you're struggling with sleep. So it might be turn your phone off or try and have a regular bedtime. It puts it all together in a nice, accessible way just to work through the content and understand some things about well-being. Then it also has this community that I was talking about. which is a safe space for young people to discuss mental health. And one of the ways we can say it's safe is because it has moderation. We have an auto mod feature that automatically flags content, and we do have clinical moderators like Shaminka who are on the platform and are able to moderate that content. And what this moderation means is that young people can post about their mental health, they can talk about their pets, they can talk about what books they're reading. But if some of the content gets flagged as indicating that a young person might be at a bit of a risk, then it gets flagged. It doesn't get posted onto the platform, so it's not going to trigger another vulnerable young person on the platform. Then one of our clinicians, one of the moderators, will be able to reach out to the young person directly and offer them support and make sure they're supported. So from this, we do know that young people want to talk about mental health. We're seeing young people talk about mental health. Shaminka, when you were 14, you were seeing young people talk about mental health. So young people, they're going to talk about mental health, but they're going to connect with each other, they're going to talk about it. We know that they find it beneficial to talk about their mental health because we've conducted these interviews. We're seeing the research come through that we're doing on most that shows these benefits to them. So when we're designing most, when we're talking about most, we say that we have a responsibility and a duty of care to make sure that this is happening in a safe way, that we are facilitating it. So young people can have these conversations, they can talk to peers, they can talk about what's going on for them, but we are in a position to make sure that if someone is unsafe or something's happening, that we are there to respond, we're there to help them. And there are ways to design social media that encourage regulated use, that facilitate healthy connections and community, that provide accurate information. And some of those ways are you put requirements about who's posting on the platform, like in China with requiring a qualification. You can draw on what are called persuasive system design principles, which we've brought on most, which as an alternative to trying to stoke dopamine and cortisol, which we don't want to do for anxious young people on the platform. That would not be very helpful for us. These are designed to build a sense of safety and warmth and trust between the user and the platform so that hopefully they will engage because they want to, not because we've gone and addicted them to this content and they feel anxious if they're not on most. Also, if the platforms take responsibility for the content, for the safety of users and the accuracy of information, that also provides a safer space online for everyone. And also, if we just consider that young people will find places where they want to be, and they will increasingly turning towards social media to look for help. So being there to provide healthy alternatives, safer, regulated alternatives for them, I think is a really huge benefit for young people.
That's great. Yeah, and I guess what we're saying is that in tackling a topic like social media, there are multiple levels at which we need to tackle it. So, governments obviously need to be engaged in this, and we know that our Australian government is definitely thinking hard about how to manage this. And also that those that are developing platforms have a real responsibility to be thinking through how to do this in an ethical way. Lastly, there's the individual level. So thinking about how us regular people can actually handle social media and handle it well. And so when it comes to young people, I guess what we really think is a good first step is to equip young people with knowledge. And this comes down to the village that is actually around a young person. Commonly we think of schools and parents and others who are able to actually shape and support young people. And we think that some of the things that they need to know are, about how algorithms actually do shape what they see, to learn the ability to critically evaluate information when it does come through, to recognize manipulative or harmful content, to manage privacy and safety, and to develop healthier, mindful boundaries as well. None of these are easy things to do, and we could have spent an entire hour talking about all of those strategies, but just wanted to list off a few to get you thinking about it. When we're thinking about mindfulness, I know psychologists have been harping on about this for quite a while, but I guess we're just thinking about the idea of actually bringing attention intentionally to what we're doing, because coming back to that attention economy previously spoken about, and how how much we can slip into autopilot around social media use. So we actually want to slow down and notice each action as we're taking it, so that we actually get to make decisions and not just go about on autopilot. And I guess when I'm saying I'm also suggesting a major point is that is really, as adults, modeling healthy boundaries and healthy use of social media as well. I think that's a really important thing that we can do. Some families find it useful to put limits and restrictions on when phones are used. So whether it's like limiting usage at night, or trying to encourage more in-person activities with other human beings in person, creating like phone-free spaces at home or in schools as well, encouraging offline hobbies, and even just delaying smartphone use as long as possible. These aren't all strategies that are going to work for everyone, but there's just some ideas on things that people can try as well. So I guess tonight we're hoping that we've given you some food for thought. Very keen to hear some of your questions. We also really love to talk about most, so do ask us some questions about that if you like. But I also wanted to particularly acknowledge that Rory has actually joined me in being my co-presenter with 48 hours notice. So I do think that we should give him a hand for that.
Thank you.
Yes.
And a hand for Shaminka as well.
Thanks. And I also wanted to acknowledge that Dr. Lee Valentine was unable to join us tonight for family reasons. We're really thinking of Lee tonight, but also just wanted to say that Lee had a huge hand in actually preparing the content for tonight as well, and does incredible research on this topic. So do Google Lee Valentine as well.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Rory and Shaminka. So we have about 10 minutes or so for some questions. Your question caught me first, so...
Thank you, Shaminka and Rory. What do you think of the recent case where a young person sued the social media companies for mental health harm, and what implications that may have? Do you think it's going to have any impact on the behaviour of the social media companies?
Oh, I love the idea of more accountability personally. So I think, I think that's where, we're thinking about the systems level, we're thinking about the individual level, and we're trying to tackle it at all levels, right? And so I do think that commercial social media companies have a lot to answer for, but there isn't a lot of accountability in place currently. So you always hope that some of these early cases, and I actually don't know the details of this specific case, but you do hope that early cases do actually encourage more of that accountability, because certainly from our perspective, working in a smaller not-for-profit and trying to get funding to sort of do healthy things, like just competing with the large companies that have so much money, I think it's I think something's got to give at some point with that. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. My question is straightforward. Do you think the social media companies should be blamed for their algorithm or keep attracting attention? I look for information on Google, I get my mobile phone, and then videos, I forgot what I'm doing with my mobile that.
Can relate.
And this can be particularly challenging for young people to control their behavior at the individual level.
I do think, if not blame, I think they should be held accountable. I think if you are a company providing a space that people can come and congregate and connect, that you do have a responsibility to make sure that you know what's going on with the algorithm, that if someone does challenge you, if someone comes to sue you as well, that you can be accountable, that you can answer to any questions that people might have about transparency, and take that on and acknowledge that that is their responsibility as the social media company providing this service, the social media platform. Absolutely.
That's great. I agree.
Got a question over here.
Thanks. This question is coming mainly as a parent. I've got a 10 and a 13-year-old. And as you were talking about the helps and harms, it occurs to me that from the outside, it's really hard to see which is which, because I think the kind of person who's most likely to be harmed is someone who has some need that's not being filled by their real life. That makes them prone to, eating disorder content or extremism or whatever. But the person likely to be helped is also the same sort of person if you're marginalized and you aren't understood. And so how can you tell from the outside which of these things is going on, and how can you design something that is one and not the other?
I mean, I feel like you've answered half of it in what you've said, right? I think that's a really brilliant comment. just on really putting together who is the most vulnerable population here. I think that's really great. Maybe I can just speak from our experience with most. Like, I think one of the things that we do is we do have a really robust questionnaire at the start where we do ask a lot of questions about mental health and sort of what a young person is experiencing before they do come onto our platform. Our intention, though, as a digital mental health service is to make sure that we're linking young people in with the appropriate supports. Obviously, that's a very different intention to what a commercial social media company is doing, right? But I do think that's maybe something which is a little bit different, and that we're being quite intentional around that. But these are big questions, right? Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
I also wanted to say, if I could just jump in, having those conversations with your children, and like Shaminka was saying, building the capacity within the children to have that critical reflection about what sort of content they're engaging with. How does this make me feel? Do I sense that this content is trying to make me feel that way? Having these questions as well, because sometimes the content itself is not trying to create like body image comparisons, but those can just happen because young people are at such like a malleable state in the development. So having those conversations and focusing, how do you feel when you see this? What does it make you think? Do you go away and think about it? Because part of that, the help or the harm, is going to be what they feel, what they tell you, and what they start to learn about themselves as well.
That's such a great point. And I feel like that's one that we didn't cover, that, the importance of communication with adults and keeping that open. Yeah, that's really great.
I think that nowadays adults are getting increasingly aware that social media can be harmful. But when I was younger, there would be some opposition between myself and my parents in terms of, I think that technology is good for me, I'm enjoying it, my parents are concerned about it. So I'm curious about today, in your experience, how do young people feel about social media, and are they concerned about it as well, or are they attached?
I feel like it's a question for you, having done interviews with young people.
I think it is just such a broad range of responses. I think some young people might be addicted to social media without recognizing, like we're talking about clinical levels of addiction. I think some young people really are aware of how much time it's taking up, and they're kind of sick of it. And I do think some young people, they resent how much of their lives happen on social media, how important it kind of is to be switched on and like not switched on, like plugged into what's going on. And it's just so difficult to say, really. There's just so many different ways that young people are responding to social media now. So I'm sorry, I haven't really given you a specific answer, but there are definitely young people who are just sick of it and are trying to spend less time online.
I was just wondering if you have any other resources that you recommend. It sounds like Most is a really good one, but anything else that could encourage youth to use social media responsibly?
Not to be super origin-centric, but I think, so yes, Most is one which is available through the App Store and also through Headspaces. But also eHeadspace does have some resources online. Reach Out is another really great organisation for young people. And also there are some chat-safe guidelines that have been put together by a team at Origin just around how to talk about suicide and mental health in online spaces as well. So those are some resources that come to mind. But obviously, I know my peeps, so they're the ones I know. Yeah. Does anything else come to mind for you, Rory?
Not that really comes to mind. I imagine like looking up government websites, but they will have like health information as well about what things to look out for, what sort of ways to check in with yourself when you're engaging with social media.
Just going back to your topic before, like in terms of motivation, one of them is relatedness. As a young person, how would you is there any tips or tricks as an adult on how would you communicate with a younger person? Because they will be like, you're so old, you don't know what you're talking about. And then it also creates a sense of belonging for the young person. If all of my friends are looking at the same thing, why are you stopping me from looking at what my friends are looking at?
So do you mean in the, like when
Yeah, so like as an adult, how would I approach that conversation with a younger person?
How old are they?
Teens.
I think one of the things is, if they're saying that you're old, you don't understand, one of the things you can start with is, help me understand. What is it that you're talking about here? What is it that means so much to you? show me that, let me understand. And then from there, I feel like with a lot of conversations actually with teens or younger people, when you're an adult, if you allow them to share the information, that is them kind of inviting you into their world. So you can start to engage, you can ask questions, show some interest, hopefully build that understanding, so that instead of them saying, oh, you're old, you don't know what you're talking about, they say, oh, no, you've listened. Okay, so you might understand because I'm the one who's just told you what I'm talking about.
It's great. Nothing to add.
Hi. Also, thank you so much for all this information, this talk. It's really beautiful and impactful, and I need to take this on for myself as well as my community.
Me too.
I had 2 questions. One was one is more for myself. If someone is struggling, or anyone is struggling, what are some do you have any practical tips of how to reduce social media consumption? And my second question was also you mentioning that education is so important for young people to be educated on the harms and how to manage their social media usage. What is the current reality in the educational system that you know of? How early are they being educated, and is there anything that we can do as a community as well?
That's a great question. So the first one was around how to limit social media use. I know that there are a bunch of apps out there that do heavily market themselves on social media, which is hilarious, about limiting social media use. I won't name them because I'm not being sponsored by them or anything like that, but there are a few out there. I also just think really trying to get off a device is probably the first helpful thing. I can just tell you what I do, right? And there are times when I just literally try and keep my device somewhere else, or I have a time where I'm just okay, it's time for bed, and I turn it off. I actually turn my phone off, which can seem like a wild thing to do. But anyway,
it works.
It works. It actually does. But the other thing for me is the mindfulness piece is so important. I literally, sometimes I will think to myself, oh, Shaminka, you are about to click on the Facebook icon. Do you want to do this? And I'll just hover over it. Or I'll think to myself while I'm in an app, I'll think, I don't want to be here anymore. And I'll be you know what? I'm going to get out. But that's been after a lot of working on being more mindful of usage. So those are some things that work for me personally, if that helps.
What I've done myself, I got a watch because I'd want to go for a walk and I'd say, well, I need to know what time it is. I need my phone. So I got a watch. So now I don't need my phone with me. When I go for my walks, I got an old digital clock to go in my room, so I don't have to check my phone. I just have it off now. I kind of just try and remember that sleep is sleep time. Just turn it off. And it's acknowledging, I think it might not be strange to feel a bit anxious or apprehensive. You're oh, what am I missing out on? What's going to happen on my phone? But really embracing that and sort of being able to sit with that so that you can start to not rely on your phone so much, that connection to the instant gratification of social media.
And I think I'd add to that, natural healthy rewards, right? When people are actually exposed to drugs, for example, we talk about the difference between that and natural rewards, watching a sunset and patting a dog and things like that, just trying to get rewards that are not digital. I think that's important too.
Well, talking about rewards that are not digital, this has been a real reward for us this evening. So thank you both, Shaminka and Rory, and particularly Rory for jumping in the very last minute. If we could have a round of applause for both of them. Thank you so much.
That's you too.
Thank you for listening to the podcast series of Raising the Bar Melbourne, a special health edition. If you want to listen to more Raising the Bar talks, head to rtbevent.com/podcasts.